I look at Nik McMillian, and this is a guy that, hey, it's 3rd and 6, it's 3rd and 5. You need somebody to run a quick slant, quick hitch, get the reception and get the first down. This, to me, I think is what Nik McMillian can be for Kansas. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nik Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. We got another banger episode for you because Kansas football is moving quickly in the transfer portal. A bunch of new commits that we're going to be breaking down on today's show. We talked about a bunch of guys earlier in the week, so if we missed a guy that you were hoping to hear about, I would encourage you to check out our previous show earlier in the week where we probably talked about him there. So be on the lookout for that. We also spent some time talking about KU basketball earlier in the week after their big overtime win against TCU. So if you're looking for some more basketball analysis from us after that game, check out that show. Yes, I know there's a lot happening. There's a lot moving, and we're trying to stay up to date as best we can. So really appreciate those of you that are enjoying this content with us as we continue to break down everything that's happening around KU football and KU basketball right now. Very busy time of year for us. All the more reason that you should be subscribed on Apple and Spotify and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, where you can share a comment, tell us which players you like, your thoughts on what KU's doing so far in the transfer portal, and much more. You can also like the video. You'll want to be subscribed on YouTube because we are going to be continuing to do more live shows throughout the rest of this spring season for KU basketball. We'll do some live post-game shows coming up later on in the year. We're expected to do one next Tuesday night when Kansas takes on Iowa State. We'll be live after that game, as that's a Super Tuesday matchup when KU hosts Iowa State at Allen Fieldhouse. We'll have a live reaction show for that one and much more at KU basketball. And maybe we might even sprinkle in some live football shows if there's enough people that are interested in maybe asking some questions and joining us for a live show. So I don't know, just a little bit of a teaser potentially for the future, something to keep in mind. As it relates to the transfer portal, Kevin, once again, Kansas football moving very quickly. We talked about it earlier in the week. Kansas is probably going to be looking up at upwards of 20 or more players out of the transfer portal. They had 8 committed last time we talked, and in classic transfer portal fashion, they got a commitment pretty much right after we finished recording our last show. So that may happen again for this show. That's how quickly things moving. We are recording this on what's today? Wednesday? I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday, January 8th, late in the morning. Or no, what's today? Today's Thursday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. See, I don't even know what day it is. Thursday. Okay. Thursday, January 8th. That's what today is. Late in the morning on Thursday. So just to keep in mind the timeline there. But the guy that they got on Tuesday, right after we recorded our previous show, immediately after, pretty much right after it happened, was Tulane defensive lineman Tre'Von McAlpine. Out of Tulane, he was second team all-conference in the American Conference at Tulane, who, of course, ended up going to the college football playoff before losing to Ole Miss. 6'3", 305-pound defensive tackle. He spent 3 seasons at Texas Tech. He redshirted in 2022. In 2023, as a redshirt freshman, he was more of a rotation guy for Texas Tech. He appeared in 8 games. In 2024, he played a little bit more, played in 11 games, had 19 tackles and 1.5 sacks. Then he transferred to Tulane in the spring of 2025, where he was credited with 35 total tackles this season for Tulane, 2 tackles for loss. He played more true nose tackle at Tulane. About 2/3 of the time is where he lined up there, played a little bit differently at Texas Tech. And I know, Kevin, that's something you wanted to highlight about him is, again, another guy that, in your eyes, can be versatile in terms of how Kansas wants to deploy him with their defensive front.
Yeah, when you look at the way that DK McDonald uses his fronts, guys move around, right? You have Blake Harreld, who plays basically a 3 technique at times and then bumps out and plays almost a defensive end spot at times. You're going to have defensive tackles who play kind of a 3 technique and go the other way. They play sort of a 2-gap nose tackle at times. And we saw how valuable Keenan Caldwell could be in that role last year when Kansas would play sort of their version of a bear front. And I think when you look at McAlpine, that's one of the things that stands out, Nick, is you can play him at either spot, but I really think it's his ability as sort of that true nose that can really help this team out, because you want to have that sort of guy next to Blake Harreld and let Blake Harreld do what makes Blake Harreld really, really good and makes him an all-conference candidate. And McAlpine is as good at that as probably anybody that KU had on its board. He's got the size, he's got the strength. You can double team him and he doesn't give ground. But the other thing, Nick, is he's not just a hold his ground guy. He has the handwork. He has the different things to be able to get off blocks and go make plays. He has a little bit of pass rush to him when you give him a chance to do that. And so to me, when you're looking at this whole group, and like you said, we did an episode over all the previous guys, and then there have been 8 signees since then. When you look at the whole group, I think this is probably my favorite guy of the entire group, including the guys that we still have yet to talk about on this episode. I think this is a tremendous get and is another example of, the defensive line really filling out nicely.
Yeah, it feels like he slots in very well with Blake Harrell, right? And then maybe that becomes sort of your 1-2 punch at the defensive tackle position with McAlpine and then Harold, and then maybe your next wave is Marcus Calvin and Eamon Smalls. You throw in Conde as maybe the guy from D2 who sort of has a little bit of a higher upside, and that's pretty solid, right? Like that's going to be your group you're going to roll with, right? And you and I are both huge fans of Blake Harrell. We think he's a first team all conference level type player. McAlpine was an all conference guy at the American level on a playoff team for Tulane, so you feel pretty solid about that. And then you've got some upward depth behind that. So, yeah, would you say this pretty much fills out your interior defensive line at this point for Kansas? It's as we're kind of going through this process, I'm just mentally as a checklist saying, okay, this position group is set. Would you say that's the case now for the defensive tackles?
I think they take one more, Nick, and I don't think that the next guy is going to be somebody who maybe moves the needle as much as McAlpine and Smalls do. I think it may even be a multi-year guy where, hey, this guy has some potential. Let's get him in the group and get him in the rotation and then sort of help build around him over the next few years. But I think the level of investment probably won't be as high for the next guy, would be my guess. If the right guy's out there, maybe they do just go ahead and swing for the fences and say, hey, this group is going to be really, really good. I think it's already pretty good, but I do think that they wind up taking one more guy at that position.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about, the financial side of things, right? McAlpine feels like a guy that probably required a little bit more investment than maybe some other players that Kansas has on the board already. So either way, I think it's a really good pickup, and I would agree with you, right? This feels like a guy that's going to be somebody who will be a pretty big factor on your D line in 2026. So really excited about that one. That was the one that they got pretty much right after we stopped recording, which is a bummer because I wanted to talk about him sooner. But yeah, really solid player. And again, I think something to keep in mind, just one more final thought on McAlpine is, with interior D linemen like that, sometimes it can be kind of hard to really evaluate if you're just trying to look at the counting stats, right?
Sure.
I think about Devin Phillips for Kansas, the transfer they had from Colorado State a couple years ago, who by all accounts was a really, really solid nose tackle for Kansas and did an excellent job of filling his role, but he didn't really fill up the stat sheet, right? That's part of being an interior defensive lineman. McAlpine, for what it's worth, his PFF grade is good, and also he had a pretty low missed tackle rate, just around 5% missed tackle rate if you track that at the defensive line spot, which is also pretty good for him. So those are some advanced numbers maybe to look at to keep an eye out for him. He also only has one season of eligibility left. This is one of those guys, when you talk about breaking down different types of players Kansas is getting out of the portal, this is sort of your one and done guy, your guy you hope to come in and instantly make a pretty big impact up front, and then he'll be on his way beyond that with the one season of eligibility left.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to agree with you. I was going to say, yeah, you're going to see them, sort of try and mix things in, because they did lose a lot of guys at the defensive tackle spot, and at a lot of these positions, they're not just trying to grab a starter. They're trying to fill in guys who theoretically could be multi-year guys. But this is absolutely a case where I'm not saying you immediately write him in pen as the starter. He obviously has to earn it. That's something that Lance Leipold has always had these transfer guys do, is when they come in, they have to work their way up from sort of the bottom of the depth chart. But I think you could probably write him in pencil at that nose tackle spot. This is a guy that you take thinking he's going to hop in right away and make a major impact.
Along the defensive line, Kansas was not done. They added another player from that area, which is Michigan State edge linebacker defensive end David Santiago. David Santiago is a 6'4", 250-pound edge player. He spent 2 seasons at Air Force. In 2023, he redshirted as a true freshman. In 2024 at Air Force, he had 38 total tackles in 10 games and also played quite a bit on special teams as well for Air Force that year. He then transferred up to Michigan State, where this past season at Michigan State in 2025, he had 24 total tackles and 1.5 sacks. 2 years of eligibility left for Santiago. This is an interesting piece, Kevin, because it feels like he could maybe fit in a couple different spots for Kansas.
Yeah, and he graded out pretty well, according to Pro Football Focus. And one of the areas he graded out well, Nick, was against the run. And if you look at last year's team and kind of the struggles that they had consistently stopping the run, the defensive tackle group was pretty good. Where they got bitten a little bit more was on the edges, and then with the second-level guys, if you count Lyric Rawls coming up as kind of a second-level guy, there were times that maybe he didn't get the right angle and things like that. And so those were the areas where maybe they got beat a little bit more in the run game. David Santiago is a guy that graded out pretty well against the run. He also graded out pretty well as a pass rusher. And I think when you look at the athletic tools and then his size, I think when you look at what Michigan State was wanting, maybe not quite as big as Michigan State would want for sort of that strong side end spot, but I think he could fill it at KU. They wouldn't want him to get that much bigger to fill that spot. And I think he's somebody that really could push Alex Bray on that spot for that strong side end. And we've seen, like you said, those ends kind of line up in different gaps. And I think Santiago is a guy that's athletic enough that if DK says, hey, you got to drop into coverage in a zone, he can do that. He's also somebody that can hold up against the run. And I think he's a player that could wind up sort of pushing for a starting spot among that group, even with them bringing back Leroy Harris and bringing back Dak Brinkley and guys like that. Santiago, I think, is going to be a really nice rotational piece for him.
Well, and I would just point out, if he started his career at Air Force, that means this guy is somebody that probably is aware of, discipline and obviously and what it takes to make it as and all that, you get what I'm saying, basically.
Sure.
With starting his career at Air Force. But yeah, I think he is with the athletic tools that really kind of piques my interest here. It's 6'4", 250, and a guy that can maybe even move a little bit in space. That's, I think, exciting, and we'll see what kind of role he could possibly carve out for himself at Kansas. Again, 2 years of eligibility left for Santiago potentially, so get him in this season where maybe he is more of a rotational guy, and then depending on what happens with a guy like Leroy Harris or whatever it may be, perhaps this is a player that has a much bigger role in 2027 too for Kansas, which would be exciting as well. We talked about one running back Kansas got committed earlier in the week in Jalen Dupree out of Colorado State. You and I both felt that they were looking for another, right, to sort of fill out that running back room. And sure enough, they did get another commitment from another running back. Syracuse running back Yasin Willis committed to Kansas as well. And Willis has speaking of athletic profiles, Willis is a very interesting profile. Yeah. He's at 6'1", 235 pounds. So this is a much bigger back. Out of high school, he was a top 15 running back in the country. He was the number 1 recruit in the state of New Jersey, according to 24/7 Sports. In 2024, as a true freshman at Syracuse, he rushed for 130 yards and 1 touchdown. In 2025, he was Syracuse's leading rusher with 558 yards and 4 touchdowns, including a highlight that Kevin clipped from on social media. I actually have it here, Kevin, if you want to run it here for our good listeners here as well, or good watchers here as well. This is Willis at Syracuse last year against Duke. Again, 6'1", 235 pounds. Jumping over a guy in open space. So he's definitely got a little bit of athleticism to his game as well. And again, led Syracuse in rushing this past season with 558 yards. He didn't have a single 100-yard rushing game, but he did rush for over 63 yards in 6 games over the course of the season, averaging almost 5 yards per carry. So he's definitely somebody that Kansas can look to, I think, and rely on at the running back position. The one thing I would just point out is both the running backs that Kansas now has committed in the form of Dupree, who we talked about previously, and Willis, neither one of them are real receiving threats. Dupree had just 12 catches for Colorado State this past season. Willis had just 9 catches for Syracuse. So these are not necessarily guys that you're going to be expecting to get the ball in a lot of different ways. This is more hand it off, downhill power running game. It seems like that's what Kansas was focusing on in the transfer portal. And I think they got two really solid pieces with Dupree and now with Willis, who, again, at 235 pounds, this dude, I think, can be a bruiser.
Yeah, and I think they're looking for a third back as well. And when you look at some of the guys that they've kind of entertained at that spot, it does feel like they're looking for more of a guy who can catch the ball, who can maybe do some different things in that extra spot. But with these two guys, these are guys that can wear you down, right, Nick? I mean, when you're talking about Dupree being 210 plus pounds, Willis being nearly 240 pounds. And the thing that impresses me about Willis watching him, he has some patience to him. A lot of times, bigger running backs, they just sort of hit the line and whoever's in front of them be damned, whether that's, their own offensive lineman or whoever. Willis, you see him break a few runs where he kind of pauses, lets the blocks set up, and then accelerates. He has a little more juice than you would expect for a bigger running back. Obviously not a ton of wiggle there, but if you pair those two guys together, you're not necessarily saying, hey, Kansas has a Devin Neal right now that's going to go out and rush for well over 1,000 yards. But you do have two guys that, hey, if it's a game that you feel like your offensive line can go lean on somebody, you feel pretty good about those two guys being able to maximize the holes that your offensive line is giving you.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think you talked about it with Dupree, and I see some similarities with Willis and sort of that one cut downhill, right? And I don't hate that from running back, right? Like, I like the idea of just simply putting your head down, getting positive yardage, using that power if you have it, using that size if you have it. And so, yeah, I think you've got two guys that are really exciting. And like you said, it would be nice to sprinkle in somebody that, again, the gadget, I think people hear the term gadget and kind of see it more in a negative view, is like, oh, he's just a gadget player. But like more of like when I say if you could add another gadgety type guy, just more a guy with more shifty, right? A guy, somebody maybe you can get in the open space, you can make guys miss in the open field and so on and so forth. So I don't know, maybe that would be something that I would keep an eye out for Kansas potentially adding to that room as well. So that's a handful of guys that Kansas has gotten. There's plenty more to talk about, plenty more to break down, including perhaps my favorite addition of this point for Kansas in the transfer portal. We'll get to that. We'll also talk about a guy that maybe might be coming back. Maybe we'll talk about that also later on in the show. We'll do all that coming up next.
Hey, what's happening, people? It is Benny Heiss, KCSN betting analyst. And while the Chiefs may not be in the playoffs, that doesn't mean there is not plenty of action to go around for the rest of you that are still crazy fans of the National Football League. And with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, it makes every playoff moment feel bigger. So whether you're looking at individual matchups in the wild card, or for a possible Super Bowl matchup, or for futures come postseason time, DraftKings has your back, and they also have your back with early exit protection. If the player in your eligible NFL prop goes down at any point in the first half, guess what? You can still get paid in cash. What an opportunity. What a way to be able to enjoy the playoffs and not worry about anybody that you include in those props going down, especially early on, and ruining the rest of all of your legs. So here's what you do. You download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use the code KCSN, that is code KCSN, to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Remember, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, wager tax pass-through may apply in Illinois. You must be 21 plus in most states. Void in Ontario. Restrictions apply. Bet must win to receive bonus bets which expire in 7 days. Minimum odds required. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio. Limited time offer.
This is the Pay Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nik Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you're not already, please subscribe, Apple and Spotify for audio, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We're striving for 1,500 subscribers, so really appreciate those of you that have already subscribed. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? You can subscribe with one click, and then you'll be notified when we do more live shows over the course of the spring. And obviously, as we get ready for the summer off season, spring football, and then obviously we'll be right back into the thick of things in the fall in 2026 for KU football as well. So be sure you subscribed. You can like the video. You can also share a comment, leave your thoughts. Let us know who your favorite player is out of the transfer portal class so far, and much more. I teased it before the break, Kevin, and you talked about McAlpine as being maybe your favorite addition to this point for Kansas. Well, let me give you my favorite addition, I think, to this point for KU. In Buffalo wide receiver Nik McMillian, who announced his commitment to Kansas on Thursday morning. He is a 6'1", 190-pound receiver. He will have just 1 year of eligibility remaining, and he spent his entire career at Buffalo. He was first-team All-MAC this past season. He led Buffalo in both catches and yards this past season, almost 1,000 yards this season, over 60 catches as well. And Kevin, how about this? To end 2025, McMillian had 6 consecutive 100-yard receiving games to end the season. And in the course of that run, he had at least 7 receptions in 5 of those games. So he was a high-volume target that Buffalo went to early and often down the stretch of the season. He had a big game against Miami, Ohio, who ended up playing in the MAC title game, 8 catches for 147 yards. He also had 2 touchdowns in a game against Central Michigan with 7 catches for 122 yards. Against Akron, he had 8 catches for 177 yards. Against UMass in October, he had 10 catches for 119 yards. That was a season high in receptions. Now, the one thing is Buffalo played one Power 5 opponent. It was their first opponent of the season. It was against Minnesota. In that game, he had just 2 catches for 20 yards. But besides that, he was a highly, highly productive receiver for Buffalo throughout MAC conference play. He's a guy that, again, was at Buffalo his entire career. In 2024, he had a season-ending injury and only played in just 2 games. So really had his one big season this year for Buffalo. But a guy that is a reliable possession catch type receiver. He's got some explosiveness. He can run the ball down the field. He had several 40-plus receptions for Buffalo this season as well. And he is the guy that I think steps in and immediately becomes sort of that 1B with Cam Pickett for Kansas. And this is a guy that I think offers you a different skill set than Cam Pickett, which is great, right? Sure. Cam Pickett, we talk so much about his yards after catch ability and his ability to get the ball in space and make plays. I look at Nik McMillian, and this is a guy that, hey, it's 3rd and 6, it's 3rd and 5. You need somebody to run a quick slant, quick hitch, get the reception and get the first down. This, to me, I think is what Nik McMillian can be for Kansas. And so I'm very, very excited about him as a guy that you can rely on, whether it's Cole Ballard, whether it's Isaiah Marshall. This is, to me, is the type of player that I think in those 3rd down situations, you can look to him and say, hey, you know what? Need you to run something quick, get the ball in your hands, and get the first down. I think he can do that, and I am very excited about Nik McMillian.
He reminds me a little bit of another Nick, and not Nick Springer, no offense. But Nick Harwell, who was a wide receiver actually under Rob Ianello, under Charlie Weiss. And Nick Harwell was a guy that they got from Miami, Ohio. He was incredibly productive there. And then he came to Kansas. I think he had like 450 yards receiving, something like that. But watching him play, Nick, I always felt like if KU had consistent quarterback play and had thrown the ball a little bit better, that he would have been a guy that would have been an 800 yards, 900 yards type of guy. I thought he was that good of a player. And I think McMillian brings a lot of similar strengths. You know, both of them are guys that are a little bit faster than maybe you think they are when you're watching them. The number of times that he kind of gets that little extra step on somebody, you see quite a bit. But the big thing is this guy will route you up, Nick. I mean, like you brought up the slant route thing. He's somebody that on that 3rd and 7, he's going to get inside leverage on that defensive back. And even if the DB is draped on his hip, he's going to make a contested catch. He's a terrific contested catch guy. He's got really good quickness. He does a great job of finding holes in zones and kind of finding open spots. And so to me, you know, Cam Pickett, I think, has a chance to be really good. I'm not saying that. But to me, this is your 1A because I think that if you're looking at a guy and you're saying, okay, who's going to consistently get open game after game after game and have the potential to maybe have 50 catches in the season, I think that kind of shades a little bit more toward McMillian. I mean, Cam might wind up with 50 catches, but you're going to have some behind the line of scrimmage, you know, so some different things like that. McMillian, his average depth of target was way down the field. And you wonder if that's going to come a little bit back down to earth with him facing Big 12 defensive backs on a week in, week out basis. But I still think, hey, this is a guy that you can have, run a hitch or a cross or something like that, and he's going to find a way to get leverage, to get open, and give his quarterback a good target to throw the ball to. And so I love this skit. I think when you look at the receiving core as a whole, Nick, you felt like they're going to take two, right? And so McMillian is one of those. And with them getting McMillian, who I think is going to fill that Emmanuel Henderson role, he's going to fill it differently. Emmanuel Henderson was kind of the all or nothing guy, right? Like he had this incredible speed and he could break off an 80-yard play at any given point. I think McMillian is more the type of guy that's going to break you off on cuts and things like that, as opposed to somebody that's going to give you that much of a one-play touchdown type thing. But I think what you're looking for now in the portal with having Cam Pickett in the slot is that sort of 6'4", 6'3" plus, I should say, wide receiver on the other side that typically KU's found that guy who can run a little bit that you put on that other end, whether that was Canty, whether that was Wentz while Canty was hurt, Quentin Skinner before that. I think you're looking for sort of that taller guy that can get down the field that maybe isn't the guy that's going to catch 50 or 60 passes, but he's really going to hurt the defense when he does catch the ball. I think that's what you're looking for in your other portal spot at this point.
Yeah, I would 100% agree, because you have Cam Pickett, sort of your yards after catch guy that you can get the ball in space, get him on screen passes, things like that, RPO type plays. And then now you have McMillian, who, as you outlined, I think it can be sort of your more reliable workhorse type receiver that you can go to in for contested possession catch type plays. Now you'd like to go find somebody that is, again, a little bit maybe of a longer strider that is going to give you sort of that element of taking the top off the defense, right? And not somebody that's as fast as Emmanuel Henderson was, so to speak, but just, that type of player maybe that you can utilize and more of a deep threat. But yeah, I love McMillian. I'm very, very excited about him. Like I said, he's my favorite pickup up to this point, I think, for Kansas so far in the transfer portal. Next, we'll move to Georgia Tech safety Christian Pritchett, who committed to Kansas as well in the middle of the week. Pritchett is a guy that you look at the safety room for Kansas, and we talked about it, Kevin. There are several positions across the board for KU where they're going to just need some extra depth, right? And I think the safety position is one spot where you kind of felt that way with what they have. And Pritchett, I think, checks some of those boxes. 6'2", 195-pound safety. He's spent 2 seasons at Georgia Tech in 2024, or he spent 3 seasons at Georgia Tech, actually, excuse me. In 2024, he was basically exclusively a special teams guy for Georgia Tech. In 2025, he only appeared in 5 games. Something else to consider with this is the Dye brothers, Jalen Dye and Devin Dye, are technically in the transfer portal, but they don't have any eligibility left. And you may be asking yourself, how's that possible? It's possible because of the Diego Pavia situation, where there is a potential court ruling that could grant some of those players that had started at lower levels an additional season of eligibility. So something else to potentially watch at the safety position, I think, is if that ruling goes in favor of Pavia, which I'm not saying it will. I don't even think it should, truthfully. But if it does, the Dye brothers, I think, could be guys where they're in the portal, but they don't have any eligibility. So if that gets reversed, they could be options to come back to Kansas as well. But I think Pritchett is certainly a guy that checks some boxes in terms of additional depth at the safety spot and giving you some extra punch there.
Yeah, depth, special teams, like you said, you love guys that have that special teams experience. And he'll have, with how wide open that safety room is, Nick, I mean, he'll have every opportunity to win a spot in that rotation. It's just up to him. Yep. I mean, I think the opportunity is there. And so if he came to Kansas and said, hey, I've been a special teams guy at Georgia Tech, I want to try and get on the field more on defense, this is a great opportunity for that. And so I'm interested to see when we get our first look at Pritchett sort of with that group, how does he look? Because obviously great size, great frame, a lot of the things that Kansas likes in a safety. And he comes in, he's got the special teams pedigree, and he'll have a chance to prove he's more than that.
Kansas continued to work in the secondary with another commitment on Thursday morning as we record this That's a Ball State defensive back, Roman Pearson, also into the fold now for Kansas. Another guy just like Pritchett, Kevin, who checks a lot of boxes in terms of size. 6'2", around 200-pound defensive back. He'll have one season of eligibility remaining for Kansas this year in 2026. He started his career at Bucknell, and in his last season there, he spent 3 years there. In his last season in 2024, he had 3 interceptions. He transferred from Bucknell up to Division I this past season at Ball State in 2025, where he recorded 27 total tackles and had 1 interception. Again, another guy that I think, just as you outlined with Pritchett, somebody that I think adds some depth to that defensive back room, and a guy that I think certainly is going to be in position to fight potentially for, starting level snaps. When you look at the cornerback spot, you're going to have Jalen Todd, you're going to have Austin Alexander, you're going to have Jalil Hurley, Saeed Gibbs. Pearson now adds into that mix as another guy that, again, maybe has the most size of all those guys I just listed, to be honest with you. So that's a big benefit for him as well as a bigger defensive back, but somebody that's going to have the opportunity to fight for playing time, I think, in that secondary.
Yeah, for sure. And I texted a little bit with Alan True, who, those who don't know, we also do the Verbal Commitment show. Nick helps out on that as well. And we've had Alan True on that show from 24/7 Sports. He covers that area, sort of Big Ten country, better than anybody. He's done it for forever. And when I asked him about Pearson, one of the things that he said was, yeah, like he can play corner at a high level, but there's also some versatility there. And so he could be a guy that you could move to a nickel, maybe move to a safety spot. I know Pro Football Focus had him with like 3 free safety snaps last year, so it wasn't much. But Allen was saying that he thinks that's in his toolbox. And so bringing in an athlete like that who can play corner, could potentially even start at corner, like you said, Nick, but also is the body type that, hey, if it's 3rd and 12 and you want to get another cover guy on the field, maybe even at a safety spot, he's somebody that could potentially do that. I think Pearson's a really nice get for them from that standpoint. By the way, aging myself a little bit here, Nick, Roman Pearson's dad was a stud at Ohio State in the mid-90s. A running back, Pepe Pearson, was a 1,000-yard back at Ohio State, played some, I think, in the NFL, like a 4 or 5 year career, but just sort of good bloodlines there as well. And Alan said that Pepe's a coach now, and so said that Roman is very well taught as somebody who is the son of a coach. And so certainly the type of guy that you would want in that secondary room from a frame, skill and versatility standpoint. Could wind up starting, even if he doesn't, could wind up being a part of the rotation at different spots. And that's, worth its weight in gold right now.
And then one final guy, you always love to see offensive line commits. I think that's always a positive. It's one of those position groups where you can feel like you never have too many bodies. Kansas dipped down to a lower level to get Wayne State offensive guard Trezelle Jenkins Jr. from Wayne State. This is an interesting piece, Kevin, and this is a guy that not necessarily for 2026 maybe, but somebody that in the future you could be seeing for Kansas, because he started as a true freshman at Wayne State. He signed early in January at Wayne State and then ended up starting there in the spring of 2025 and then playing this fall. As a true freshman, he started 4 games. He appeared in a total of 10 games. And he also has grown significantly, is our understanding, in that he has gotten quite a bit bigger. He's about 6'5" now, 315, 320-pound range. And one other little nugget about Jenkins is that his dad, Trezelle Jenkins Sr., was an offensive lineman at Michigan State in the 90s and was a first-round draft pick to the Kansas City Chiefs. He was at Michigan. Yeah, he was at Michigan in college, but he was a first-round draft pick to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, he was. And that's where we'll leave that part off probably, because this is a Chiefs channel, and there's probably some people who – but Dad was a really good college football player. Trezelle Jenkins Sr. was. And he wound up being 6'7", Nick. And so, maybe there's still some growing left to do here. He wound up being a left tackle at Michigan, and that was a big part of the reason that he had such great stock was, those were some dominant Michigan teams up front. son apparently fell through the cracks as a recruit a little bit, winding up at Wayne State. But you would imagine if he's anything like his dad, then he's got a chance to be a really, really good Power 4 football player, and has some versatility, right? I think with the size and everything, he's somebody that you look at and you say, okay, he's been a guard. Could he be a tackle? And if he can, terrific. If not, you feel like you've got a big body guard who can move a little bit. And so this is one I think for the future. I'm not trying to put a cap on him for this year, but it would surprise me a little bit if he hopped in and was an immediate starter for them this year. But I think as they continue to sort of rebuild that offensive line room, which we saw them do last year with some multi-year guys, like Jack Tanner. Unfortunately, Kyler Mercer went back in the portal and left. DeAndre Harper, they brought in some guys who had played at previous stops, but were young guys, had years of eligibility left. I think Jenkins fits nicely sort of with that model, and then with the high school class that they've got coming in, because like guys like Caden Snyder, I think have very bright futures as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the type of player that, like you mentioned, with his size and some of his pedigree in terms of his dad, like you take a flyer on him, right? I mean, started 4 games as a true freshman at Wayne State, take a flyer, bring him in, and maybe not necessarily in 2026, but beyond that, he could become, a quality piece for you. Obviously, Kansas took a D2 lineman a couple seasons ago that ended up being an NFL level player in Dominic Pooney. So, there is some precedent for taking a player like this and then allowing him to develop at your program. So, yeah, really excited to watch him. I'm assuming he won't be hard to miss, Kevin, when we get a chance to go out there and spring ball because of his size. So that should be fun. But, yeah, a guy that again, is not necessarily for 2026 and for the future. And like we've talked about, that's kind of how this portals goes, right? There are 3 categories. You got your guys that you think are going to impact your team right away. Then you have guys that you hope have like 2 years left that you can develop. And then you have somebody like Jenkins who, again, taking a flyer right now as a true freshman when he played at Wayne State. And then you hope in maybe 2 years or so that he's a quality player for you. So let's take one more quick break, because there was another guy that technically would not be a transfer that could potentially be coming back to KU. Some interesting things. What's going on over there, Kevin? What's going on over there? We're going to talk about that and there's some other names to watch and what we expect from Kansas going forward in the portal. We'll do that coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
My name is Terrell Jolly. A lot of people call me TJ, founder and CEO of Integrity Capital Management. So Integrity Capital Management originally started out as a property management firm, but we slowly transitioned to what is described as an incremental development firm that's focused on situational housing. I know most people say affordable, but we believe in creating housing for people that are actually in need and built to the end user. I believe everyone needs a home, because when you have home, you have hope. The reality is that when you're building a business, one thing you don't think about is like what a true banking relationship means. And, I had the honor and privilege of meeting Debbie early on in my career when I was just trying to get going. And as a small business, it's really challenging at times because people don't understand the concept or not believe the longevity because you're just getting started. But Debbie was willing to take a chance on me, be patient with me. I almost look at it like a grassroots initiative. She's seen and believe what I'm about. Anybody that's really true about their business and want to get some things done, I would definitely trust hands down Emprise, because Deb's team, along with Aaron and Jackie and all the amazing people that work behind the scenes, even from the treasury side, I would say, hey, give them an opportunity, because you won't be disappointed and you will actually be in hands that actually somebody care and that will see you from start to finish.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nik Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. If you have not already, please go ahead and subscribe on Apple and Spotify and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN to stay up to date with all the latest happenings in the transfer portal on the football side. And of course, we're talking plenty of KU basketball as well. If you want to check out our reaction to KU's overtime win at Allen Fieldhouse against TCU from earlier in the week, would encourage you to check that show out as well. and we appreciate your support. If you're on YouTube, subscribe and also like the video and share a comment. Let us know. Share your thoughts. Join in on the conversation with us about KU football, KU basketball, and honestly, whatever's on your mind. You can ask a question in the comments, literally anything, and I'll make sure that we talk about it on the next show. So it could be as great. Whatever. I don't know. Just we're an open book here on the paid podcast. So as I teased just before the second break, Kevin, something interesting is happening potentially that we should probably be discussing here. We talked about it in our last show because Kansas very aggressively went out in the transfer portal early and signed several linebackers to fill out their room because they had lost John Kamara, who ended up going to Wisconsin. They lost Logan Brantley, who ended up going to Boise State. They lost Joe Sipp, who obviously, unfortunately, didn't really get to play. Season derailed by injury. And we presumed, based off of previous reporting, that Kansas had also lost Trey Lathan, who was their leading tackler in 2025. Well, then something interesting started happening there, which is that, to peel back the curtain a little bit, schools have about 48 hours after a player files paperwork before they actually have to submit it, right? So technically, if a player were to file for a transfer, right, the school doesn't have to actually put it out until 48 hours after that happens. Now, in most cases, it happens much quicker than that because, things are moving quickly and you want the best for the players, right? So if a kid wants to be able to transfer, you want him to be able to have everything signed, sealed, delivered so that he can then move on to whatever his next destination may be. So typically the process moves very quickly. But the point being that after those 48 hours, you would know for sure if a player had officially gone to enter the portal. Well, with Trey Lathan, he had tweeted out that he was entering the transfer portal. Transfer portal opens on Friday, January 2nd. So you think, okay, if a player were to file to enter the transfer portal on Friday, January 2nd, the absolute latest that you would realize that would be Monday, January 5th. Okay, great. Well, then let's say if a player happened to wait, needed some extra time to deliberate over the weekend, January 5th, Monday, if you were to wait and file then, you would know about it by Wednesday. Well, now we're sitting here on Thursday morning, Kevin, and Trey Lathan is not officially in the transfer portal yet. So, leads you to believe that there may be something happening there with Trey Lathan and Kansas, perhaps some additional negotiations trying to get Trey Lathan back. And needless to say, Kevin, it would be very, very significant if Kansas got Trey Lathan back, the leading tackler again in 2025 for Kansas. We spent a lot of time talking about the fact that at the linebacker spot, especially in recent history with Kansas, we've seen a lot of transfers be even better in their second season at Kansas under Chris Simpson in that group. And not that guys like Landon Watson and Quincy Davis and Yasin Willis can't be quality players for Kansas. You're bringing them in for their first time. If you had a guy who'd been here, if you had a guy who had started every game last season, was your leading tackler last season, all of a sudden you feel miles better about the linebacker room. And that seems like it might be a possibility going forward.
Yeah, that would be a bigger get than anybody KU is probably going to get in the transfer portal. And it's funny. We talked about this, I think, last episode, but a friend of the show, Michael Swain, who does a great job at fog.net, put out something before the portal and said, here are the 6 guys that KU would really like to retain are the most important guys. And you had guys like Leroy Harris on that list, Blake Harold was on that list. Jalen Todd was on that list. And all of that is to say he listed 6 guys, Nick, and KU brought 5 of them back. And the one guy who didn't was Trey Lathan. And so if you brought Trey Lathan back, you would really feel like, okay, you retained a lot of the guys that you really, really wanted to retain for the 2026 season. And you mentioned a lot of really good points. One is that you don't want to start over at that linebacker position in general. But 2, we've seen linebackers make that second-year jump and make jumps the longer they're in Kansas' system under Chris Simpson. And so Trey Lathan, as good as he was last year, and for a significant portion of the season, he was tracking as an All-Big 12 type player. I think he would potentially be an All-Big 12 type player at that middle linebacker spot, bringing him back next year. We saw the athleticism, the fact that, he's willing to hit it. And all the things that make Trey Lathan a really good player. But if he were to come back to Kansas, you would feel so much better about that linebacking room. And Nick, that's important because we've been talking about the other rooms here, right? We like what they're doing on the defensive line. That may be the strength of the entire team right now, is that defensive line group. Cornerbacks, you're bringing back so many guys, 4 guys basically who played in key moments last year. And then you're adding a guy like Roman Pearson to that group where you feel like you're 5 deep, probably with quality guys. Safety, they still have some work to do, but linebacker, if you're not returning anybody, you would feel like that was a major weak spot on the defense. All of a sudden, if you're only replacing one starter, because KU typically plays 2 linebackers at a time, if you're only replacing one starter and you're asking one of the transfers to fill in next to Trey Lathan, you feel so much better about that room and that spot on the defense. And you would really feel like this defense has a chance to be significantly improved from what it was a year ago.
Yeah, and I know, obviously, I think for a lot of fans, the defense did struggle at times last season. And, I think there was the question about, do you consider making a change in terms of scheme, in terms of coordinator with DK McDonald? If you gave him a second season with Trey Lathan back to sort of anchor the middle of your defense, I would be okay with that, right? Let's see what happens, right? Especially with, I think, the potential for, an improved pass rush on the outside. When you talk about Leroy Harris, when you talk about Dak Brinkley, Blake Harold in the middle. We obviously talked about McAlpine to kick off the episode, and he's a guy that we both really like as well. So I think you would feel a little bit more optimistic. I would feel obviously way more optimistic about the linebacker room specifically. And then in general, I think that would also then make you feel a bit more optimistic as well, holistically, about the defense also. So I don't know, something to track, something to potentially keep an eye on as a possibility. And if KU pulls it off, that would be very significant because, again, as you mentioned, that would mean that you basically retained every top player from last season that you wanted to retain, right? Or that you were maybe focused on retaining. And that's very, very impressive to do, especially in this era that we live in. So something to keep an eye on for sure. All right, so that's basically all the new commits that Kansas has gotten, plus a little bit on Trey Lathan there. Where do you think Kansas goes from here, Kevin? We're up to, 15, I think, commits, or maybe even 16 now, actually. It's easy to lose track. So you're probably still looking at wanting to get an additional handful of guys. We talked about maybe sort of getting to that 20, over that 20 number, or maybe even more. So is there a position group that you're looking for next that you think KU should focus on? Because I was kind of thinking this through. Kansas has really been pretty compartmentalized in their attacking of different position groups, right? And sort of that first wave of commits, heavy on linebacker. They got an offensive lineman. They got a running back. Second wave, we've seen more on in the interior D line, right, and on the edge, and in the secondary, another running back as well, wide receiver. What do you think might be next, or what are still the position groups that you're watching potentially for Kansas to add to?
Yeah, the two that I'm really watching, we brought up safety. I think Kansas really needs to make hay at the safety position more than what they have. The other position is interesting because they've gotten 2 offensive linemen so far, Nick, but I think both of those guys are going to be interior guys. And so I think offensive tackle is a key spot. And I wouldn't be surprised if KU brought in 2 offensive tackles and even, challenged Calvin Clements and said, hey, win your spot. And that's not to say that he can't do that. I thought Calvin was playing a lot better at the end of the year than he was, early on or in the middle. Maybe you bring in a left tackle and say, okay, Calvin, we're going to bump you back over to right tackle so you can maybe feel a little bit more comfortable there. But I think bringing in 2 offensive tackles probably, and then bringing in at least 2 safeties, if not more. And I'd like, and I realize I'm not the one doing this, and it's not like they're taking down a Christmas list for me right now, but I would think you would want both of those safeties to be starting caliber guys, where you would look at it and say, this guy is going to really push Taylor Davis, and if Taylor Davis beats him out, then then great. But you want somebody that you feel is a legitimate competition for him at that spot. And then you lost Lyric Rawls, and you did bring in the safety from Georgia, but I do think you could still stand to maybe go get a similar guy to like a Lyric Rawls at that spot and kind of let them do battle there. Competition is a great thing, and especially on defense, you see guys get banged up and hurt so easily. You never want to be in a spot where you're just putting guys out there that you don't want out there on the field. And so I think safety and offensive tackle are the two that jump out to me. You're probably going to add another running back, probably going to add another wide receiver. You're going to add a tight end at some point as well. We said probably another defensive tackle, maybe another linebacker. But I think the groups that, really require multiple players of investment still are probably safety and offensive tackle.
Yeah, and two additional thoughts on that. One being, you got to remember the financial side of this.
Yep.
Kansas has probably invested already a decent amount of resources into the group of guys that they have in the fold, especially when we talk about a guy like Nik McMillian, a guy like McAlpine, right? Probably the handful of those linebackers probably invested a decent amount in that as well. So now you maybe start looking for more value adds, right? And I think Trezelle Jenkins is a great example of a value add, somebody that probably is low cost now, and you can get him in your program and see if you might be able to develop over the next couple seasons. So something else to watch. The other final note I would add as well is, considering we are this far into this portal cycle, Kansas does not really seem to have had any interest in any quarterbacks. So that's pretty much off the table, especially when you factor in the financial element of it, where if Kansas was really interested in bringing in an additional quarterback to potentially battle it out with Cole Ballard and Isaiah Marshall, that probably would have been a priority early in the cycle, because that would require such a significant potential financial investment. So I think it's safe to say that Kansas is rolling what they've got, which is Cole Ballard and Isaiah Marshall and Jalen Mason. Something else to pay attention to there, if you're worried about just the fact that there are only three guys, Mikey Pauley is still on the roster. They moved him to tight end last year because of the injuries they suffered there. He'd been a quarterback previously. Maybe you bring him back into that room. But it seems like, to me at least, that they're going to be rolling with a battle between Isaiah Marshall and Cole Ballard at this stage of the transfer portal cycle, considering how much has already been invested, what a quarterback would require at this stage. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. But regardless, probably still looking, I mean, you outlined it, Kevin, probably still looking at adding another 7-8 guys, maybe even more, to be honest. And that's just how things go with this transfer portal cycle. So as always, as Kansas adds more guys, we'll have a chance to talk about them and break them down a little bit. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed some of our breakdowns of what Kansas has already brought in. Any final thoughts from you, Kevin, before we wrap up the show for today?
No, I think you hit it well, and I think you hit the quarterback situation pretty well too. I mean, when you look at Mikey Pauley, was a scholarship offer guy out of high school. He came in as a preferred walk-on after spending a year spending time at Nebraska. But if you feel like, hey, he's basically a walk-on plus or, a scholarship type guy, then you can probably roll this season with four guys. I know people are going to want updates on David McComb. Last I heard, he was going to visit Wisconsin, I think. Obviously, Jeff Grimes being there, had a chance to see David McComb through the recruiting process, see him throw at camp, all of those different things. So I don't know how realistic it is, for David McComb to come back into the fold. But I think that even if he were not to at that quarterback position, KU's likely to roll with kind of what they have.
Yeah, it seemed like McComb might have been interested in Oklahoma State. There might have been some interest there, but obviously Oklahoma State got Drew Mestemaker, who has several years of eligibility left. And so if you're a guy like McComb looking to go play somewhere, probably Oklahoma State wasn't going to be the place for you at that point. So yeah, certainly something to keep an eye on as well. But overall, I think this has been, to this point, Kevin, as we're recording this on January 8th, a pretty successful portal class, I think, for Kansas up to this point. We'll obviously have time to look at it in a more of a bigger picture, 30,000-foot view once we get closer to sort of wrapping it up in totality. But to this point, there's some names that I think you can be really excited about if you're a KU football fan, and some guys that have some potential upside as well. So overall, the work will continue for Kansas because the portal, again, remains open until January 16th. That's just the time that it stays open to where you can enter. You could still add guys after that, but obviously you want to probably add pretty quickly because you want to get them in and enrolled in time for the start of the academic calendar and the start of the year to where they can be here for spring football. So that's sort of a brief look at the timeline. But again, we'll be talking about any more guys that Kansas gets committed. Luckily, as we're recording the show, Kevin, I don't think anybody committed while we were in the middle of recording, except Kansas did sign a long snapper. So from Cal. So they got one guy that is an additional player from Cal. So a long snapper. So that's good. But
we didn't even know about the fact they may add special teams guys, Nick.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, kicker, you assume they'd have to have a kicker, Laith Marjan being gone. I don't know about punter with what they have, but that's true. Yeah. Another spot to keep an eye on. To monitor, I guess. So especially because, special teams ended up being so huge with Marjan being so good for a good chunk of a year, kind of ended up helping Kansas lose against Arizona, but we don't talk about that. So we'll just end the show there. So that's going to do it for this edition of the show. I'm Nik Springer for Kevin Flaherty. Again, we'll talk plenty more KU football transfer portal news as it happens. We're also going to be continuing to cover Kansas basketball, though they are on the road in Morgantown against West Virginia on Saturday afternoon. And we will be planning on having a live show after KU and Iowa State on Tuesday night at Allen Fieldhouse. So we'll be talking to you again very soon. Until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nik Springer. See ya.